Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the ST-A1, which is the Japanese rank 4 battle rating 6.7 medium tank. It is relatively similar to the American M46 pattern and has kind of a similar playstyle. I will give you obviously a full rundown on the statistics, give you tips and tricks, and will compare it to its main opponents on the battlefield. I will also tell you how to make this tank work and how to take it out effectively on the battlefield. And I also have some really nice ace tanker gameplay for you, so stay tuned. Before we begin with the tank review, let me just give you a statement about this tank. I think this tank is far from being useless. On the other hand, I understand where the criticism about this tank comes. If the implementation of this tank is lucky or unlucky by Gaijin, if it is historically correct or incorrect, is not so important for a tank review, as the tank review mainly focuses on how to make the vehicle work in the game. And you just have to deal with what you have and what you face on the battlefield. And today on a live stream of the Orange Doom, I actually stated that this tank is not too bad and I quite like it. But I think I have to clarify it. I talked to a few people that I trust on their opinions, and they said that this tank is really, really bad. And I should, leave it in my garage, never to touch. But, it's a Tier 4 vehicle, so I want to spade it, like all the vehicles in the game from rank 1 to rank 4. So I thought to myself, well, let's give it a try. And I was kind of up for a surprise under the aspect expecting something really, really bad. And when I now have, after I played many battles in this tank, I think I can say this tank is not easy to make work, but there is a unique opportunity that I will show you in a moment. So I think now it's time to begin with the tank review. So first of all, let's talk about the armor and let's begin with the hull. The lower and the upper glazes are both 75mm thick, angled around about 50 degrees backwards, giving them an effective thickness of from 130 to 110 millimeters of thickness, depending on the exact angle that you look at it. The side, on the other hand, of this rather long tank is 25 millimeters. That is thin enough to actually let through any kind of shell that hits you, especially AAA. On the other hand, it is thick enough to arm all the fuses that hit you from APHE shells. And then the rear of the vehicle is very thin indeed, 15 millimeters. That is also the thickness of the engine deck, the deck of the front part, and also the turret armor, or the turret top, in fact, and that is not very thick indeed. 25 millimeters and 40 millimeters are the thickness of the back and the side of the turret, which is rather small for the size of the rest of the tank. Furthermore, you can actually hit the back of the tank from the front, which is just under 40 millimeters of effective thickness, and then you can hit the engine and the fuel tanks and set them on fire from the front. Furthermore, there is a step in the upper plate that leaves the turret ring open, which is just 15 millimeters on the right hand side, which is kind of a big weakness, as we will see in a moment. Then the turret front is kind of a mixed bag. First of all, the turret cheeks are just 40 millimeters thick. That is very thin for 6.7 battle rating, and even at such extreme angles like this, where you have more than 60 degrees of angles effectively, it never goes above 120 millimeters, and you get penetrated practically there by anything. Then the turret front itself is 50 millimeters thick, and despite some angling going on, even at the edges, it's not very thick and will not hold off too many shells. However, there is an overlay at the top and the bottom of another 75mm plates, which are kind of strangely shaped and have an overlap with the edges, so that can create some bounces. But the tip is, don't rely on this. And to actually avoid this obvious turret ring weakness, when there is a AAA in front of you, you can try to angle at least, but then it actually exposes the left hand side of the turret. So the armor on this vehicle is nothing you should rely on in direct head-on engagements against practically anything. But there are certain points that can cause some ricochets. What about the interior? Well, this tank is really big, and the back we have the big engine and the big fuel tanks. They actually don't explode that much, but they get set on fire very easily, I have to say. So fire extinguisher is a must-have in this tank, like in every tank. Then we also have this big transmission in the front that partially protects your driver, and also a little bit the gunner and the commander, which sit in the turret on the left hand side with the loader on the right hand side. The problem with this tank is all around the turret. First of all, the turret is relatively small for this tank, and yeah, there is a relatively big and permanent 90mm gun in it with a huge gun breech that gets damaged very easily and doesn't protect the crew of any shrapnels whatsoever. And then we have 40 shells stored in 3 ammo racks, 9 shells here, 2 here, and when you empty 10 shells, because 1 shell of the 11 shells is registered as already being in the breach, you empty those 2 ammo racks. But it really will not help you, because the rest of the 29 shells is stored here. And as I mentioned, when you shoot right here at the turret ring, you actually hit the tip of the ammunition and blow it up. So not just is the survivability overall very low, it is also nearly impossible to not ammo rack this tank, especially when you just aim at the side of the turret. It will blow up very regularly. So the armor is not very good, the tank is kind of funnily shaped, the survivability is not given, the armor is not given. What about the mobility? In the comparison of the mobility, I will do a kind of a showdown between the ST-A1 on the one side, the American M46, the American Super Hellcat, the German Panther II, the British Centurion Mark III, the Japanese M41 STF, and the T44-100 on the other side, to just give you a feeling where this tank stands. But you know, please keep in mind that stats don't tell everything. I will talk about this in a moment. So with 500 horsepower, this tank has not the strongest engine in this comparison, but with just 34 tons, it is also not the heaviest nor the lightest. And the horsepower to ton ratio with 14.7 is kind of a bit disappointing for a medium tank. Just the Centurion Mark III has a significantly lower horsepower to ton ratio. So you can see when we come to the percentage, this is 20% less than the American M46 and nearly 50% less than the M41 Walker Bulldog, which is a highly mobile light tank. The top speed, on the other hand, is kind of mediocre. 45 kilometers an hour is not the fastest. In fact, again, just the Centurion Mark III is slower in top speed, but it's kind of comparable to the American M46. But like the Centurion Mark III, the ST-A1 together with the M46 is always very close to the top speed. Like I mentioned in my Super Hellcat tank review, and also respectively with the M41, you never see the high top speed. And overall, depending on the terrain you're at, you always cruise around with 35 to 40 kilometers an hour, and at very good and at very good terrain, you actually see your top speed very regularly. Where this tank is very good, on the other hand, is the reverse speed with 17 kilometers an hour. That is really nimble indeed. Just the Super Hellcat is significantly faster, and this tank, like all the other tanks with the exception of the Super Hellcat and the T-44-100, does have neutral steering. So in reality, that means this tank comes very quickly actually from A to B, as long as it doesn't go uphill. Downhill, you have the limited top speed, which is really a hindrance. The tank itself could go faster indeed. The real problem that actually is the major drawback on this vehicle, in my opinion, is the very bad maneuverability. Despite having neutral steering, the tank is rather long for its overall size. That gives it a massive drag while turning. So even at high speeds, turning is very, very difficult, and in close quarters it really hurts the tank a lot. So the mobility itself is alright, but the maneuverability is kind of disastrous in many respects. Well, then let's talk about the firepower, and let's begin with the gun itself. We have on the ST-A1 a 90mm M3A1 cannon, which has a total shell capacity of 40 rounds and a reload on an A screw of 9.1 seconds. That is the very same gun as on the M46 pattern, and very similar indeed to the Super Hellcat's M3 cannon. Caliber wise, it is the second highest. Just the T-44-100 D10T, which has a significantly longer reload, is bigger in pure caliber. Also, the shell capacity is the second lowest. Again, the T-44-100 just can carry 35 shells. And then the turret rotation speed is rather interesting. It is nearly as fast as on the Super Hellcat. With 21.4 seconds, you can throw around the turret quite nicely. Especially the Panther II and the Centurion Mark III have significantly lower turret rotation speeds. And this is where the comparison to the M41 Walker Bulldog comes in. It has nearly 50% better turret rotation speed, and it is, kind of natural because it is a light tank with a significantly smaller gun that also has a significantly shorter reload, with around about 50% faster reload. The gun depression on the ST-A1 is kind of strange. Indeed, over the front and the side of the vehicle you have 9 degrees of gun depression, but over the back of the vehicle you just have 0 degrees of gun depression. So if you get immobilized, somebody that is behind your tank is quite safe from you, and then you have to rely on your allies to save you. 19 degrees of gun elevation, on the other hand, is quite nice indeed, and truly competitive in this respect. So the gun itself has also quite a nice stabilization. It doesn't take too long to elevate and lower the gun. It reminds me, like on the Super Hellcat, just a little bit better. Now let's talk about the ammunition, and indeed there is quite a lot to talk about. Which ammunition you have access to, which one you should research, and how to use it effectively. And we begin with the stock HE shell, 13mm of penetration at any distance against any angle, with a muzzle velocity of 823 meters, is not very usable. It's not worth talking about too much, other than that you have it from the first battle on. The second shell type is the M318 shot, which is your stock AP shell. It has 853 meters per second, so it's not the highest velocity in this comparison, and it features a penetration value of 192 millimeters against flat armor at point blank range. It is not a very great shell, and the damage output is not really great. The first researchable shell type is the trusty and well-known M82 shot, which is an APCBC APHE shells. The muzzle velocity is also not the greatest with 853 meters per second, but it also features a lower penetration with just 170 millimeters. That is around about 60 to 65 millimeters less than, for example, on the German's Long 88 on the Panther II or the 100mm D10T top shell. So it's not very great in terms of penetration. However, with 137.2 grams of TNT equivalent, it can one-shot enemies quite reliably, especially when you shoot them in the side. And this should be the major shell that you use. The second researchable shell type is the M304 shot, which is an APCR shot. It has quite a nice muzzle velocity of 1021 meters per second, so it's much easier to aim than the three previous shell types, and it features a much increased penetration of 264 millimeters. That is nearly 100 millimeters more in terms of raw penetration against flat armor than the previous mentioned M82 APHE shell, and it gives you kind of more option when you face heavily armored opponents with flat armor from the front. But as I mentioned, you don't face the Germans with their Ferdinands or King Tigers or even Yak Tigers, so it is kind of useless, to be honest. The fifth shell type and the third researchable shell type, which is a tier 3 upgrade, is the M332 shot, which is again an APCR shell, and it has further increased muzzle velocity with 1178 meters per second and a bit more penetration with 271 millimeters at point blank range against flat armor. And you also have to research it because it comes in succession, so it comes with a follow-up research path, sadly, and I don't see too much difference in performance, but it is a little bit better than the previous mentioned APCR shell. The last shell in this comparison is the M348 heat shell, and it has also a reduced muzzle velocity of just 853 meters per second. That is kind of in the region of the AP shells, and it features 210 millimeters of penetration at any distance against flat armor, and actually performs best against sloped armor of all the mentioned shell types in this comparison. Now, it is a heat shell, so there are two things that I want to talk about. First of all, the damage output is relatively low. Then you can use it against AAA vehicles because there is not just the damage from the heat beam, but also the explosion itself, because you have nearly 1 kilogram of TNT equivalent, so it splashes quite a lot against those AAA trucks. It is very helpful. Furthermore, when just your gun breech is damaged, you can blow up your gun breech, reload a heat, and use it as heat shotgun. Remember, when your gun is blown up, you have reduced accuracy and reduced muzzle velocity. In close quarters, that is not as important, and the heat shell keeps its penetration and not in conjunction with the muzzle velocity, because it is a chemical based energy weapon, so to speak, and in this respect you can overcome the rather rare occasion where just your gun is damaged. But you still have to beat the reload of the opponent. So let's see this tank actually in action. Well, you have seen some gameplay so far, and you can see that I rely on the APHE shell as my major damage dealer, but I have some APCR and some heat shells as backup shells, but I think up until this point I never used them, to be honest, and I drive it kind of in the medium way fashion and the light tank fashion, trying to flank the enemies. And oh boy, I was very lucky that this T-34 did not see me, and I retreat, wait for him, and Russian Trex, best Trex in game, and he bounces in return. So he had a rushed shot, he had no good crew to compete with my reload skills, and that's it. I marked this PT-76, he's still there, and I kill him with the next shot. And then there is this Russian tank destroyer. He aims at me, I'm having none of this. He changes and switches his aim. I reversed thanks to the good reverse speed. And I bounce off of the side armor. That is kind of the drawback of the APHE shell. It bounces very often. But it is still better than the APCR. But the next shell goes right through the front, killing him with one shot by blowing up a fuel tank, I believe. And that was a triple strike. And I helped my team greatly securing this flank. Now, the thought process behind the playstyle that I have is simply this. I'm not useful for my team when I'm dead at the front line, when I can take the shots, when I have no armor, and when I also don't have the firepower to go through the front of enemy tanks reliable. The shell, the M82 shell, is very good for dealing with tanks from the side, but not so much from the front, although when you penetrate they do damage. And I'm not sure if you noticed this, but I listened here at this point and I hear engines, and I can see on my minimap there is no friendly tank around, so I reverse into this corner, so to speak, and I see my first customer, the IS-2, side shot, killing him with the first shell. Nice result there. Always aim for the crew compartment. That was my 4th kill. Then I'm still waiting. I still hear an engine a little bit further away. I still wait. Patience is very important with this tank. And I still wait. Now I advance a little bit and I see a T-34 85. That's my 5th kill. That's my tanker ace in this tank. I like that. And can you imagine the havoc that this five enemy tanks would have caused on my team? King Tigers that I drive with are so good at standing in the front line. They are just second to the T-29 in this respect, and they can absorb massive amounts of damage from the front. They are one of the most survivable tanks from the front, but really, really weak from the side. And Germans love to take out their heavy tanks, and rightfully so. The King Tigers are awesome tanks. The problem is when they get killed early on, they have no spawn points left because they didn't make the kills and didn't capture the points to gain enough spawn points to get back into the battle. And when they do, it's mostly with triple A's. And while triple A's are better than the player leaving the battle, sometimes they don't cut it. And I see another Russian tank. And with the last shell of the 50 cal, I actually take him down. That's my 6th kill. I'm trying to flank the enemy as hard as I can, but I always try to also be aware of my surrounding. And when you look at the minimap, one of our allies is in trouble. He marks one enemy. I try to actually help him out. Advance, advance, advance. The Panther 2 is there. And he seems to have the situation under control. And he actually kills his opponent, that's his 43, the new Russian AAA. Then something from behind, but the Panther D actually killed the M41 Walker Bulldog before I could even swing around the gun. So what to do now? Well, now the Panthers actually took over the flank, but still I was there to support them. When you have a flank at some point, and you can see I actually have a positive gun depression over the back. I even have not 0 degrees of gun depression. It's like minimum of +3, +4 degrees. It's really bad. It's really bad to aim over the back of the turret. of the tank overall. And now I can see that A is captured. Now the enemy lines are thinned out so much that I'm comfortable to be able to deal with the opponent, whatever it is. At least I can put pressure onto him, mark him for my team, and wait for reinforcements if necessaries. Panthers are quick enough to actually do this if they are up to the task. And yeah, King Tigers can take over the role of taking the damage, and then you can flank again. This tank is very good at taking out enemies from the side, as I mentioned and demonstrated right here, but it is a bit more difficult to put pressure on the enemy in return. Very often when you have a standoff, it's better to actually reverse, thanks to your good reverse speed. As I mentioned, minus 17 kilometers an hour is one of the best reverse speeds at this battle rating, and certainly amongst the medium tanks the best, so that you can get out of this situation. It is no use to die in a direct head-on confrontation with the enemy. And so that sounds like a bit of a cowardish playstyle, but to survive is the main ingredients to deal later damage to the enemy when it really hurts them. And as I mentioned in numerous tank reviews, such as on the M41 Walker Bulldog or the M24 Chaffee, light tanks or tanks that have that kind of playstyle, such as the Super Hellcat, become more and more dangerous the longer the match goes. Now I got the intelligence information from, I think, one of our airplanes, that an M46 is in the enemy spawn point, and I tried to go in this direction, but thanks to the sun blinding me, I overlooked this guy who actually laid in an ambush and waited for me. He put one straight through my turret front, killed my gunner, and also damaged the gun breech heavily. And when the gun breech is damaged, you can't do anything. And because it replaces the commander, the 50 cal is out of order and out of function as well. So to lose your commander is relatively painful in this vehicle, because you need all the support that you can get. And this shell landed somewhere in the dirt. I thought I would have whipped it over, but from behind there is a Hellcat. None of my allies is around. I tried to retreat, but not fast enough, sadly. And that's me being dead after 7 kills, 1 capture zone. So that's the ST-A1 for you. So let's have a quick look at the post-battle results. And I just finished the upgrades on the brakes. As you can see, the tank is still not fully upgraded, but it's not much left to do. And for my 7 kills, I had another go in an airplane. I got all around 51,000 silver lines and 5,325 research points for the vehicle research. And overall, I think this tank is great. I was also second in team with 3,050 points, but I just managed to get just over 2,050 points with the tank itself in this one match. Sadly, I think that's it for today. With this tank review, I had a hard decision to show you which gameplay, but I think in this respect, the result-orientated is more convincing for those who doubt that this tank is useful in any way, shape or form. In arcade, I have to say, this tank is really, really bad to use, and I just simply can give you the tip: play realistic and flank heavily. And if you think that you have flanked the enemy, flank even more. This is the way to make this tank work. Again, I have to say, this tank is not the best of the medium tanks at this battle rating, but thanks to the APHE shell, which is very powerful, as you just could see in all those gameplays, the tank has a role to fulfill. and can support all the king tigers that you queue up on a regular basis. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it not just amusing and entertaining to watch, but also helpful and informative. If so, please give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.